My biggest beef with specialty retail at the moment is it actually special? Special to me implies differentiating. It implies difference, variability, something that is interesting and unique. And if you're selling the same stuff as everyone else, where is the interest in that? You are making the choice as a small business to determine what you're going to be selling. And if you're selling stuff that can be found everywhere else, you can't be grumpy when someone else buys it somewhere else based on price. Because ultimately, that is not something, like, that's human nature.
This is the Core Outdoors Podcast. My name is Christian Rawls. My guest today is Lloyd Vogel, the CEO and co-founder of Garage Grown Gear. Garage Grown Gear is an online retailer that has become a leading site for ultralight outdoor gear, who specializes in working with craft gear makers. As you heard in the intro, Lloyd has a distinct perspective on how he sees the industry and the key role that craft gear makers play. We spend the first bit of the conversation on the origin story of his business, and then we get right into Lloyd's thoughts on specialty retail, how to build an audience for your brand, the important role that email marketing plays, and what sets the great founders apart from all the rest. Lloyd brought the heat on this one, and there may be a few ruffled feathers. You can let me know what you think of this episode or suggest future guests for the podcast by sending an email to coreoutdoorspodcast@gmail.com. That's coreoutdoorspodcast@gmail.com. This podcast is a project of Core, Kootenai Outdoor Recreation Enterprise. To learn more about Core, check out the link in the show notes. And with that, let's get into this high-energy conversation with Lloyd Vogel. Lloyd, thanks for joining me on the show, man. I'm really glad to be able to finally get to meet you.
Hey, same, Christian. Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Well, a place where I like to start with folks is what the outdoors means to them personally. And I know that you have a history of outdoor education in the past and getting into ultralight backpacking and those types of things. So I'm curious if you have an experience outdoors that was really pivotal or really stands out to you as like a kind of an important moment in your life.
Yeah, I think the outdoors for me have always been a place for discovery. I think a place for wonder, a place for awe, a place of kind of asking yourself what the possibilities for life are, who you are. I feel like I always find myself diving deeper into spaces of my brain and my own self that, I'm not as familiar with in my kind of day-to-day hustle and bustle. But I think, I got into the outdoor space kind of initially through summer camp, trip leading, and there is no more fun job in the entire world than leading children on canoeing trips or backpacking trips or kayaking trips. Not only do you get to experience that awe and that wonder, but you get to see it in them and be a small part of their journey. So I maybe don't have a particular trip in mind, but when I was 19 and working at a summer camp up in Wisconsin, and I had no idea what I was doing. I was just like there because one of my friends was going to work there for the summer, and I was like, that sounds cool. I can like canoe a little bit. And just having these experiences of taking kids who had not spent a lot of time in the woods before and having that be something that both of us got to share in together, and just those relationships and those senses of people being uncomfortable, but at the exact same time, like extremely comfortable, and seeing people transform even over a period of a couple of days from taking something that would have been previously kind of unmanageable into something that feels like this is something that I want as a core identity for myself is really powerful. And I don't lead trips anymore. I just do personal trips, and those are fun for a ton of other reasons. But I don't think anything will ever kind of shake the experiences that one has from trip leading.
Sure. Awesome. Yeah, I had a similar experience just to do it as a similar thing back in the day. And I think that just highlights the importance of outdoors for youth, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's something I'm super passionate about, and you've seen it and you got to experience it yourself too. It's like, man, that can be such a pivotal time. Like just a little taste of wilderness for 2 or 3 days. Mm-hmm. Really does the mind good, especially for somebody who's younger. So
totally.
Yeah, very cool. There's a gap there in time, I'm sure, but I want to jump kind of fast forward up to the origin story of Garage Grown Gear, because until recently, I didn't realize that it was kind of the merging of two mm-hmm. Smaller ideas that came into one giant one. So tell me the story about how Garage Grown Gear came about.
Yeah. My background is in education. So I was a high school special ed teacher for a number of years. I was, doing trip leading through the summer camp, and was kind of graduated from college and wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. So I started working as a paraprofessional in special ed, and quickly was like, I think this is, I don't know, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was 22 and it felt like a direction. So I went to grad school, started teaching, and got a couple years into teaching and went, well, I don't think this is for me. I think teachers, there are people whose cups are incredibly filled by teaching, and those people, every teacher will always have my undying respect. I was someone who it didn't stabilize me. It didn't make me feel full. It made me feel anxious and nervous and not the best version of myself, or not something that I could see as kind of a sustainable version of myself. And so I kind of just started looking around and saying, like, what else could I do other than teaching? Because that's kind of all I had thought I was going to do. I went on this big road trip with my wife in the summer, or my then girlfriend, and we ended up at some craft show in San Francisco, and I saw all of these tiny vendors that were selling a bunch of random stuff. But I just thought it was so cool to be in a building where there were just hundreds of people this was like the physical manifestation of their dreams, and these are the things that they think about first thing when they wake up, and the last thing they think about before bed. These are dozens of little micro economies, and you don't know how people got here necessarily, but they're all here selling this thing that they're passionate about. And so I started thinking to myself, what am I passionate about? What do I care about? And quickly, I've always been an outdoor gear nut. And so I thought, well, there's a whole bunch of small outdoor brands that are in this space that are all just trying to fight for a little bit of visibility in the online marketplace. I know there's places like Etsy that exist, but none of them are really tailored to this specific part of the market. How can I create a place that just helps increase their visibility? And so I dropped all the money I had in my bank account, which I think was like $20,000, started a website on Squarespace, which I'd never done before, and reached out to a handful of different brands and asked them if I could buy their stuff to sell on, at the time, Big Outdoors. And it was bigoutdoors.org because the .com was purchased. We were not a nonprofit, but we were a .org. And yeah, I reached out to brands. The initial idea was to buy products that had long lead times and then sell them with fulfillment in 1 to 2 business days. So we worked with old school brands like Luke's Ultralight. We worked with companies like Superior Wilderness Designs that had 8 to 12 week lead times, but we'd buy 20 backpacks or 20 rain jackets and then just fulfill them because we had the on shelf stock version. And we could fulfill them really quickly because we had 0 orders. So whenever one came in, I was like, oh my God, thank you. Let me send this off. And I was still teaching at the time too, so it was pretty part time. And I really liked the concept of it, but I had no idea really how to market. I'd started off an Instagram account, and that felt like the most accessible thing for me to be able to do. And I probably grew that to having about 10,000 followers on that. But it was very much through the gamification of Instagram, kind of the cheekiest of the follow unfollows, messaging every single person that followed you and being like, oh, please just click the link and go back to my website so I have some traffic today. And so it was really me having very little idea of what I was doing and feeling like I had a good concept, but not really a clear idea how to execute it. And about 6 months into that, I thought, I don't know if this is going anywhere, or if it is, it's going to take longer than my lifetime for it to be able to manifest as an idea. So I was once again, kind of at this pivot point of maybe I'll become a firefighter. I think that's a good idea. So I started looking into fire science programs, and kind of as my last hurrah, I figured I might as well show up to Winter Outdoor Retailer and connect with some of the brands that we made relationships with. And 2 weeks before that, I found out that I had won the Garage Grown Gear Ultralight giveaway. And at that point,
you'd won it as a person, personally, you won it.
Personally, I won it. I entered it, and I think I took second place in it. So I got an email from also then extremely tiny company, Garage Grown Gear, which was operating off of a kitchen table at this point. And I got an email from Amy, who is Garage Grown Gear's original founder. And I was like, oh, cool. Well, I run this other company called Big Outdoor. She's like, oh yeah, I've kind of heard of you. And we made plans to meet up at OR. And she wasn't able to get there because of some weather thing, but I met with one of her employees, and they let me know that she was looking to either sell the company or exit it. At that point, I think Garage Grown was probably doing $2,000 in sales a month, and we were probably doing $1,000 in sales a month, not enough to make this thing be sustainable for anyone. And I turned to Chris, who was her employee, and was like, I definitely cannot buy this. I have absolutely no money. But if she's looking for someone to kind of just merge resources with, I'd be happy to like take the collective energies of Big Outdoors and the collective energies of Garage Grown and see if there's anything here that could be salvaged into a way forward. Yeah, so I ended up driving out to Idaho in my my little Honda Fit, and I met with Amy for a couple of days, and we got along well. And so I loaded up a box full of inventory and put it in the passenger seat of my Honda Fit and drove it all back to St. Paul. And the car
That was the complete inventory?
That was the complete inventory. And it still had room for
Wow.
me as a 6-foot tall human to sleep in my Honda Fit with plenty of room with the inventory that was being brought back. I brought that back into my spare or in my basement and just started throwing darts at a wall. Garage Grown at that point worked with kind of a broader range of outdoor brands. So it was all small outdoor brands, but it had some climbing gear and like yoga mats and small brand skateboards, which weren't necessarily my area of expertise or area of interest. So we kept the Garage Grown Gear name, but we kind of adopted more of the Big Outdoors ethos, which was just locking it into ultralight backpacking brands. Yeah, kept Garage Grown Gear's name because it was a little bit farther down the line than Big Outdoors. They had like an operating agreement and like a website that actually worked and wasn't a .org. Yeah, just kind of started, plowing 80 hours a week into this thing. I decided to leave my teaching job and kind of just see as a, mid to late 20-year-old if I could make something kind of happen. And that was kind of the origin of it.
Place us in time now, because I'm really curious kind of what the phases were that have taken you from a box on the passenger seat of a Honda Fit to now today you actually have employees in a warehouse and, let's call you a legit e-commerce business. Yeah, all joking aside, like you have a successful business on your hands, so it's great. What are the different phases kind of along kind of the high points along the way? And if there were any situations or just events that kind of kicked you into that next level. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like sometimes you just have these this one thing or this, you bring on a new brand that is like, oop, okay, now we have a bunch of new customers.
Totally.
Like what does that timeline look like?
So it's definitely been a pretty slow organic growth process for us. So Amy started things in 2013 and then opened the e-commerce side. It was just as kind of like an online magazine in 2013. And then 2014 saw the launch of the e-commerce side. And then I took it, we merged brands in early 2017. And at that point, very much in the basement. I think at that point, Amy, had been doing the outdoor startup thing for a while and was pretty burnt out on it and needed someone to just dive in heads over heels for it and just kind of be willing to martyr themselves for their business, which is not a sustainable thing, but it is sometimes what is kind of needed when something is kind of at a juncture point. I think one of the big things was that merger point, which was just kind of getting a new, fresh set of eyes on it that was excited. Like I really wanted it. I didn't have any other backup plan. So for me, it was my way to kind of forge something of my own. So definitely the moving of the company to St. Paul at that point really was a big galvanizing force for us. And I think from there, kind of some of the big highlight points, I ended up about 2 years into running Garage Grown, I took a different job and essentially just worked 2 jobs for 2 years. I was the chief marketing officer at Enlightened Equipment down in Winona for 2 years. And I learned a lot of like how a company can grow from being small to being a little bit less small. And at that point, they had about 100 employees and that was kind of peak pandemic time. And I kind of just got thrown into figuring out all of these how a slightly bigger company ran. And at that point, they were about like an $8 to $10 million company. So I got to be able to look a little bit farther down the line to say, oh, this is what Garage Grown Gear would need for me to be able to, like, these are the skills that it would need me to develop. These are the infrastructure that we kind of need. And so that was a really big learning point for me of just not having a background in business, just really growing up and kind of getting that MBA on the fly. And then I think the really biggest juncture point from there was, me jumping back full-time into Garage Grown. I left Enlightened Equipment after 2 years, and then I just sunk myself back into it. But when I did that, and that was, I think in 2022, relatively recently, it's kind of weird. I brought back to it a lot of knowledge of how to be able to scale a company. It also just brought my full attention back to it. And Garage Grown had a little bit of time to be able to grow from a tiny company into one that had, 2.5 employees at that point. So I think it just kind of needed time to be able to not have to compensate me in the ways that I wanted it to, and to be able to just like give it the space to be what it was. And at that point, it was a small brand. And if I wanted to be a big brand, it wasn't going to be. And it just kind of needed that runway. Garage Grown did have some initial investment when Amy was running it, but when I took it over, it had like, $5,000 in the bank account, and we haven't taken any additional investment in the past 7 years. So it felt like a very much like this is going to have to happen with the resources that we have. And part of that was also just my absolute not understanding of anything financial. I didn't understand anything about raising capital, or like, should I be doing this or should I not? And then, the pandemic really galvanized a lot of growth for us. And I think we really started expanding, not just from having really small cottage brands, but kind of getting into some of the more legacy ultralight companies as well, bringing on brands like MSR, Thermarest, and Darn Tough, and Nemo. Some of these brands that give us the margin to be able to take risk on some of our small brands, where we have brands on our site that we lose money on when we sell them. Like, that's not a good thing. But we balance.
Okay, we're going to get to that.
But we balance it with having some brands that enrich the ecosystem. And this isn't exactly the question that you asked, Christian, but I think it ties into it a little bit. I think for a large part of Garage Grown, I thought that running a business that supported small brands was enough of a value proposition, that people would just support Garage Grown Gear because we were doing good work for small brands. And I think around that 2021, 2022 time, I had this realization that, like, no, people shop out of convenience. People shop out of value. It's why Amazon exists. Like, people don't walk around wearing like I love Amazon shirts. Like, people have, there's this billion dollar company that people don't like, but they use every day. And not that Garage Grown wants to be an Amazon, but I think there's a lesson to be learned there, that if you want to be able to exist in a competitive market, you have to do something different, and it has to add value and convenience. And that for me was showing that Garage Grown needed to be a one-stop shop for ultralight. If people had to do a little bit of their shopping at Garage Grown, but the majority of their shopping at REI, they're just going to go to REI. And so that for me was, we needed to build Garage Grown as a comprehensive platform. And then by bringing in brands like Darn Tough, like Thermarest, like Big Agnes, that, in a weird way, supports the ecosystem that Garage Grown Gear exists in, and makes it a more compelling platform. And because of that, it better supports its small brands. And that's kind of a weird way of looking at it. And it's hard to explain in marketing content, but that was a big shift for us in kind of thinking.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I'm glad you bring that up, because that is a question I had for you, because you use the phrase cottage brand, cottage maker.
Yeah, either.
Yeah. And so at core, we tend to use craft gear maker. I mean, just plays along with craft beer probably is why we came up with it, because that is something. When I look at your site, you see these, there are people still literally making it in the garage or their basement or a tiny office, which is awesome. Love those people. And then you do have these other bigger kind of name recognition brands. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just curious how you define those cottage folks. And then do you have like a standard, whereas if you're going to bring a big brand, it has to be just this, or if you're going to bring a cottage brand on it, then you do that. Like, how do those two work together in a relationship?
Yeah, great question. We definitely have a lot more lenience towards working with small brands. Like, we want to fuel our site with small brands. The idea of putting, like, we're launching, by the time this podcast comes out, we'll have launched a small brand called Virginia Foothills Designs, which is this dude, Scott, who made us a handful of packs that we're going to be selling, but he doesn't have a website. Like, he sells off of his Instagram occasionally. And that's so fun. Like, no other retailer will work with brands at that stage. And we do. And we accept that risk. We take on that risk because that risk is the opportunity to be able to do something cool with a brand. Like, Scott's not selling anywhere else. Like, this is for us. Like, we are going to be in partnership with Scott and his company. And that for us is really awesome. And I look forward to the opportunity to have them, to have his packs next to Hyperlight's packs. Like, what a cool thing. Like, Hyperlight, big player in the ultralight space, is going to have people, going in between, like, oh, do I want to buy a Hyperlight pack or like this dude Scott's pack? that's a cool thing that I take a lot of pride in for Garage Grown. And even as we take on these big brands or bigger brands, our marketing energy is always towards supporting small brands. That is the lifeblood of what we do. And so for us, kind of locking down that cottage definition is important because there is a lot of ambiguity about what that means. To me, that's someone who is making their own stuff. It might be a part-time job, might be starting to become a full-time job. Maybe it's just them. Maybe it's a couple of people that they know, community members, friends, family. It's, based in their house, in a spare bedroom, in a garage, in a basement. Maybe it's in a small workshop that they're renting somewhere, but that the core facets of the business are still being run by the person who started it or as the person who is operating the business, from customer service to fulfillment to manufacturing to marketing, that there is a nature to that is very hands-on. There's not a lot of distance between the person who started that company and their product. And so I think that is a small subsect of small brands. Like you can have really small brands that outsource their production overseas, and we still really want to support those small brands. There's a lot of different ways to be able to scale a business. Some of it's domestically, some of it's internationally. I think there's right ways to do business and wrong ways to do business, but I don't think it's always as clear as where you manufacture. And I think we want to be able to support small brands that produce in the U.S. and that make it kind of in this cottage method. And we also want to be able to support brands that outsource their production domestically. Like we have a lot of companies that they just can't meet the demand themselves, or they just don't know how to be able to scale a manufacturing company. So they turn to local cut and sews or different domestic manufacturers. So yeah, a lot of ways to be able to do it, but certainly cottage, in-house, real, small scale, very malleable, like not quite sure if this brand's going to be around in 3 years type of thing. Might turn back into a hobby. You might be like, this is too much work. I'm not really into it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe a second mortgage involved. We don't know.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's interesting because there are definitely brands where if you want to go buy this brand, you're going to buy it from Garage Grown Gear, or you're going to buy it directly from the maker's website. Mm-hmm. And so how do you avoid unnecessary competition between the two? And I'm going to tack on the question that you brought up a little earlier about you lose money on some brands. So the question is, how does it work from a margin perspective for the brands? And how does it work from a margin perspective for Garage Grown Gear? And you don't have to go into the details of it, but just kind of the big picture thinking about how does margin work?
Yeah. There are some brands that Garage Grown 100% makes a ton of sense for, and there's some brands that it doesn't. So some of the brands that it doesn't make sense for are brands like Timmermade. They are they make a really niche, incredible brands. I'd love to be able to sell Dan's products, but he has a 12-week lead time. Like he can't meet his own demand. Why would he turn to and sell it at wholesale prices to us to have us sell it? That doesn't make sense. But for a lot of brands, what they are using Garage Grown Gear for is for our reach and for our growth and for our visibility. We are not a passive partner with brands. We don't have brands that just kind of sit on the shelf and that we don't advertise. Like we say that we have two big facets of our role as a company, and that's the retail side and the promotional side. And I think that makes us, I think, unique in a lot of retail spaces, is that because we have a shared interest in this, like we want to be able to take risks on brands. We want to be able to promote them. We want to be a platform that's taking a product you haven't heard of and making it into a product that, everyone carries. And I think that is a cool opportunity for us. And why brands come to us is that they're saying, I launched this website and I don't know a thing about marketing. I don't know how to be able to put it in front of this larger audience. Or they're saying, I've got an Instagram, but I don't know anything about web design. I don't know how to be able to afford to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And for us, we say, all right, well, we've got a 200,000 person newsletter list that is as tailored as humanly possible to people who are looking to support small brands. We've got a website that drives 15,000 people a day to it. We've got social media. We've got content. We've got other legitimate brands. We've got a customer base that is super loyal. And that if we pick up a small brand, we can make it relevant. We can put it into that conversation. We can put them in a giveaway with Z-Packs and with Gossamer Gear and Enlightened Equipment and some of these big names in the space. We can suddenly take them from being a small brand that has no name ID to being one that's talked about on Reddit within a course of a couple of weeks. And I don't mean that to toot the Garage Grown Gear horn. We haven't always been able to do that. But as our audience has been able to grow, yeah, you know, small brands have so many barriers to be able to grow that I think a lot of them look and say, oh yeah, I can give up 30-40% margins to be able to work with a wholesaler and I can get known. Sweet. Like, and like they're going to be a partner that's going to be working hard for me at every step of the way. And unlike a lot of retailers, like we're not locationally based. 10% of our business is international. We ship to every state in the country. We're based in Minnesota, but Minnesota isn't even a top 10 state that we ship to. We kind of have that reach. And I think, I always feel a little defensive when people say, well, you guys are just a middleman. I'm going, well, yeah, but there is value towards, what we offer. And I think similarly to kind of that ease of use and that convenience factor of, the reason why Walgreens exists is because people don't buy toilet paper direct. People don't buy, their Doritos from Doritos.com. Like they like to buy their stuff in one place and kind of have that convenience factor. And I think for Garage Grown, it's pretty easy to be able to add a bunch of things to your cart and check out. You don't have to navigate cottage gear websites that look like they were designed in the late 80s. You don't have to perpetually take risks of, if I order this, is this actually going to ship and arrive on time? If I have an issue with a return, are they actually going to take it? They get to be able to use Garage Grown as a known platform to make their purchase as easy and accessible as possible. And for us, accessibility is such a huge thing of we want to make it easy to purchase from small brands. That's fulfillment within 2 days. That's relatively low free shipping thresholds. We sell a company called Trail Stuff that is a little tiny toothbrush that extends that you put on the end of a titanium spork. And like for that dude to make a successful business off of selling an $8 product directly, he's going to have to sell and package and ship hundreds of these a day. It's just like not a viable business model, but he can send 2,000 of them to us and we'll happily ship it with all of our other orders. And that turns into a viable business model for him. So I think like there are a lot of nuances for how Garage Grown is able to kind of be that amplifier of a lot of small outdoor brands. But I think, we are willing to take brands that no one has heard of and take products that no one has seen and try our hardest to be able to sell them. And we're not a pay-to-play platform. We only ask for the margins that we get on the product. So I think a lot of people see like this is a really symbiotic relationship. And I think it's really shown in the fact that we really don't part ways with brands really at all, unless it's a massive production issue or there's continued quality control issues or something that's really out of the ordinary. And for a lot of these folks, it's people that we've worked with for, 5 years, people who we've, gotten drinks together at our outdoor retailer or set up tents at 2 a.m. at PCT days. It's relationships. It's trying to do business in a good way, not always a way that's profitable, which, brings to your point about margins. With bigger brands, we get dictated what margins are. So like, we have no wiggle room on the Nemos, Sea to Summits, MSRs of the world. But with a lot of our small brands, like especially for accessory items, kind of that 35 to 40% range for margins is kind of where we need that to be able to sit. For slightly larger price point items, we can kind of dip into a 25 to 30% range if we're really feeling like it adds value to Garage Grown, like if it adds credibility, legitimacy, if it's a brand that makes sense or a brand that our audience like honestly just expects us to be carrying, we'll do it. And we definitely have a couple products on our site that have significantly less margin than that, but we like the brand. We like what they're doing. We think the product's unique. And in a world where the options are carrying them at a bad margin or not carrying them at all, we choose to carry them at a bad margin. And maybe it'll always be that way. Maybe in a couple of years, they'll be like, wow, I've totally figured out all my manufacturing and now you can have great margins. And obviously that'd be wonderful. But our initial, sequencing of looking at if we're going to take on a brand or not is the product good? And that's the starting point. It's not, is the margin good? It's, is the product good and does it have value to our customer base? And if it does, then we kick off the conversation. And very rarely will it just not work with margin. Sometimes that means like excluding specific products that are particularly low margin or sticking away from certain variations or certain fabrics. There's some shelters that we carry that are in sil nylon that we don't carry the Dyneema version because it just has too bad of margins. But honestly, even for brands, that's not too bad because someone can buy the sil poly version on Garage Grown. If they really want the Dyneema one, they can go back and buy it directly. I think there's always going to be that question of like, do we cannibalize sales from them? Do like some of our customers just go and buy directly once they figured out that this brand exists? And, we through surveying have found that about 60% of our customers have found out about brands and discovered them on GarageGrown and have purchased directly through our brands themselves. And so for us, like, we don't spend a lot of time kind of worrying about where people purchase. It's this idea that, like, if more people know about the product, it doesn't matter where they purchase from. If no one knows about the product, they're not going to purchase it from anywhere. So if we are able to raise the brand ID for that company, if they buy it from us, if they buy it from the brand themselves, we're still talking about such a small niche market that just getting customers to be able to click purchase wherever it is most convenient and easy for them is what we want to be committed to. And we send people all the time to our brands because, again, it's not worth, like, it's relationships. So it's not worth haggling over, a few bucks here and there.
It's so cool to hear. I applaud you for your perspective and your philosophy on business. I appreciate that because at the end of the day, it comes down to long-term relationships with your vendors and also with your customers. When you're driven by values, that ends up working both ways, both for your customers and for your vendors. It makes the long-term relationship. So I applaud you on that.
Yes.
It's interesting to hear you speak about it. Is like you're really a specialty retailer, which is sometimes not associated with e-commerce. Mm-hmm. Like we don't typically think about. We think about specialty retail as like the shop, your local shop, the gear shop that you go into. And right now, I mean, there's a lot of flux in the outdoor industry, specifically for specialty retailers, because they find themselves actually competing on a direct-to-consumer basis with the brands that they carry. Yep. And then, people are fighting for margin and struggling for margin. And sometimes you feel like, as a specialty retailer, you help a brand get big, and then all of a sudden they start marking everything off, 30% off, and you just received that season shipment. Mm-hmm. And so it makes for interesting relationships for sure. So it sounds like you're approaching it from a different perspective, which is refreshing. I guess I'd like to get your take on specialty retail as you see it, kind of from your perspective in GarageGrown Gear, kind of this e-commerce and a niche, but also as it relates to the industry as a whole.
Yeah. I think I have complicated feelings towards specialty retail. And so maybe you'll get some emails about this afterwards. Maybe I will, who knows? But I think my biggest beef with specialty retail at the moment is it actually special? Special to me implies differentiating. It implies difference, variability, something that is interesting and unique. And if you're selling the same stuff as everyone else, where is the interest in that? You are making the choice as a small business to determine what you're going to be selling. And if you're selling stuff that can be found everywhere else, you can't be grumpy when someone else buys it somewhere else based on price. Because ultimately that is not something, like, that's human nature. That's not adapting to a changing market. And so, I don't know, I think part of the big thing that GarageGrown Gear did is, like, we just don't have a lot of product overlap with other places. We differentiate ourselves by differentiating our product line. We take risks. We see new brands not as, like, fear-based, but as an opportunity to be able to do something different, and because of that, carve out a part of the market for ourselves. And I applaud specialty retail, and even I have no animosity for bigger box like REI and the Public Lands and the other big players in the space, because I think that is a lot of people's first touch point with the outdoors. And so I think it is important that we have specialty retail to be able to get people in local communities to be able to get outside, to be able to have face-to-face interactions with people who know the area, know the gear, and know the regions. But this idea that can't be accomplished via online spaces feels like very archaic to me. This idea that we need to demonize, like, progress of, like, that somehow the outdoor industry would be immune to evolving technology, and that we kind of all just need to look at the e-commerce space and be like, oh, it's dirty. Like, well, why? Like, my entire staff are people, like, I'd be shocked if there's many specialty shops out there that have folks that have hiked more miles than our team at GarageGrown, or that have a lot more knowledge about gear. Like, we sell, 3,000 plus SKUs, and none of them we don't have barcodes in our warehouse. So our picking and packing team knows every single product and variation by name. So I think this demonizing of what e-commerce is, like, yes, it can be drop shipping. Yes, it can be really deep discounts, but it doesn't have to be. Those are decisions that individual business owners have made. And, like, yeah, we don't have the ability to put something on 75% off in our brick and mortar store and hide it away from the MAP policies of online vendors. We don't do that to brands. We can't do that to brands, because if we do, we get punched with MAP policy violations. Yeah. So I don't know. I have nothing against specialty. I just think what I do have is against folks that are resistant to change. and don't understand that to be able to adapt, especially can't look the same way that it did 40 years ago. It can't look the same way it did 20 years ago. Like the internet is a thing, Amazon is a thing, REI is a thing, and to pretend like one can just kind of keep doing the same thing, selling the exact same brands and not differentiating itself and expecting different results. And then I think kind of being bitter that customers are choosing other places is like, you can't blame the customers. Like customers are kind of always the same. Like you need to look inwards in yourself and say, where am I adding real value? What does my market want? What is my unique voice? What do I offer that other people don't? And I think if specialty started doing that more, if they started taking more risk on brands that actually are interesting to both core audiences and to new people entering the space, and I think a lot of specialty shops would find more success. I went to the launch of Public Lands a couple of weeks ago in Woodbury, Minnesota. And I walked into that store and I saw Hoka immediately with this huge display. And then it was followed by Yeti and Stanley and a tiny little climbing section. And then like all of these kind of lifestyle brands. And I thought to myself, wow, if I was trying to make money off the outdoor industry, this is 100% the store that I would open. And then I thought to myself, that is literal. Public Lands in their product assortment isn't developing trends. They're just following trends. And so if you're just in the business of following trends, you're going to be behind the ball when those trends stop being relevant. And then you're going to find yourself deeply committed to products and brands and spaces that are not evolving as fast as you want them to be. And I think that is such a, I don't know. So like Garage Grown has not seen, we've been growing by 35% this year. We're anticipating doing a similar amount this past year. And I've been kind of swimming in this sea of, I know a lot of brands are struggling. I know a lot of retailers are struggling. And I don't know if it's just, there's so many variables that could be why that is the case. I think partially it's ultralight as a niche is growing, but I think it's also because, we do take risks on brands. Like for a brand that we took on a couple of months ago, we just floated them like 5 or 6K so that they could do their fabric run and build stuff for us. Like it was essentially like a no interest 3-month loan so that they could build the stuff that we could buy. Like what's taking more risk than that? And the 300 plus units that we bought sold out in 2 weeks. And so that's big reward for us. But to think that business doesn't require risk or doesn't take bold moves to be able to adapt feels archaic. And there are so many specialty shops out there that are doing really cool and unique things and that are such like hubs of outdoor community and culture. And I think there is something to be said that is hard to duplicate within online spaces. I think there are spaces like Reddit or places like Backpacking Light that for our particular niche are really incredible community gathering spaces for our little part of the world. I love going to specialty shops. Whenever I go to a new city, that's a place I gravitate towards. It's like, ooh, I want to see what their product mix is. I just want to see how they display stuff. Like I want to see if their salespeople like talk to me or not, or like just let me wander around and stare at sleeping bags all day. But I do think that we're in a bit of a reckoning for what selling gear in the outdoors looks like. And I don't think it's not something that I'm bitter about. I think it's something that is if you don't change and you don't adapt, you're gonna struggle in 2024. End statement. I don't think there's any part of any industry, and that's not just like an outdoor retail thing. I think we like to think that we're some special little a unicorn within a bubble where the issues of the outdoor industry are purely our own. You got to do something different, and expecting something different just to manifest itself, or to just expect customer behavior to change. It's just not going to be a thing. If you can buy Hoka at 8 different places, you're going to buy it at the place that's cheapest. Like I'm going to do that.
Sure.
Like everyone's going to do that, and you can't just be grumpy about it.
Bring it the heat, Lloyd. I'm glad I propped you up with that one. Yeah, for those listening, he just dropped the microphone. So there you go.
Lloyd at GarageGrownGear.com.
That's good. Yeah, Lloyd at GarageGrownGear.com. Let him know what you think. I think that was awesome. Yeah, I appreciate it. Strong opinions held loosely. Yeah, I appreciate them. After listening to what you just said, I hope there's some specialty retailers out there who are inspired and like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to take some risk. And the fact, hold on, let me back up a little bit. The fact that you are lending money to vendors to be able to run their product line for all the core makers that are part of and all the people who are just listening who are starting small businesses, standing ovation. That is super impressive. Thank you. That is taking a risk for sure, taking a risk. But then again, kind of what we said earlier, you're a values-driven entrepreneur. You're like, those values are going to, I think in the long-term payoff. And so that's pretty awesome that you're doing
Thanks.
that. And so
And to clarify, we don't do
of-
it with every brand. But it is
yeah.
the thing that if we're evaluating a space where we want this product, and the way to be able to make this happen is for us to be able to float some capital to be able to have it happen. Great. We did this for a Senchi Designs drop a year and a half or so ago. We funded their alpha run, and we got a sizable chunk of that because we took that risk. That for us is like a great way of thinking outside of the box for how to be able to do that. And Christian, to your question about, do we want our brands to be in specialty? Yes. I think that's where some of my bitterness comes from, is that it's not like these companies are sitting here and like the margins aren't that much worse. Like our gross margins are not that much worse than what a standard specialty shop would have, even though we work with small brands. But I think we love it when our brands transition into REI. That means that they're being successful. That means that the products that they've been blood, sweat, and tearsing on for the last however many years are finally getting the recognition and visibility that they deserve. And for us, that's huge. That's us having done our work. That's us having to, supplied a base of, 300 reviews on our website that when REI is looking at a product, they can go, ooh, well, there's a lot of people who like this product. And we make it so it's less of a risk for specialty shops to be able to take these brands on because they've got a proven sales, record on Garage Grown. They're obviously moving. And I've heard from specialty shops that we have people that watch what we're selling and what's moving well so that they have an idea of what might be some good things for them to catalog in their site or their store. And that's awesome. I love that. And from a purely business standpoint, we sell brands better when they're in REI. We have to do less work because there is less of a boundary between seeing a product and buying a product. Like when Hyperlight got into REI, it was like, wow, we sell Hyperlight a lot more now and we have to do a lot less work to be able to sell them because they don't need us as much. It just sells easier. And from a business perspective, that is a good thing. Now, obviously, if every place in the world started selling Hyperlight, then we would kind of get ourselves into the same type of situation. But there's also not an end of small brands popping up. Last year in 2023, we added 54 new brands to Garage Grown. This year, I think we'll probably be on pace to add something pretty similar. As much as people like to gripe that innovation is dead within the outdoor industry, there is so much of it. You just have to look. You have to spend time.
Yeah, it's happening in the niches. It's not happening in publicly traded companies. It's happening in the small garage tinkers and makers. It's happening in the niches, it's happening on Reddit.
It's happening on Reddit, right. And it requires do I spend a ton of time on Reddit? Yes. Do I go to Etsy and search ultralight backpacking? I do. And, whatever. We get brands that we then sell $100,000 worth of product in a year because, we found them on Instagram through an ultralight backpacking hashtag. And, it requires you to look, but it also is such good. And this kind of goes back to the specialty conversation a little bit of if we are on the tip of the spear for new brands constantly, good luck starting a company that's going to work with brands that are more cottage than us. It's not happening. We already work with people pre-product. I think one of the big things for Garage Grown is just making a platform that's good enough so that other makers would never look at it and go, well, why would I go to that place other than Garage Grown? There isn't a need for two Garage Growns. And largely, we don't have people that are pushing up beneath us to try to do more of what we do than we do. And I think that for us is just speaking to that core audience over and over and over. And as we grow, continuing to leverage our growing platform to do more for small brands. Not to leave them behind, but to lean even deeper into their inventory. Our biggest barrier to growth is not having enough inventory from small brands. That is our biggest thing because we move small products almost too effectively. And so now we're starting to devise plans for 2025 of how we create educational programs for our brands to help them scale. Not marketing programs that we charge them to take, but ways that we bring in industry experts to talk to them about scaling and growth and production and marketing so that we can't grow by 30% next year if they aren't able to continue to grow with us. So we view that as it is part of our responsibility to not just make sure that they're growing a little bit, but to make sure that we are a continuous part of their growth plan because Garage Grown Gear's viability as a platform depends on everyone continuing to make growth.
Okay, here it is. They need to come to the Core Summit next year because that's exactly what the focus of the Core Summit is.
Please.
Is
We'd love to.
We're trying to get as many people as we can in the room so that we can help the smaller brands become profitable, learn how to market, learn how to do R&D, learn about intellectual property law, all those things. Because, okay, plug done. Core Summit 2025. We'll see you there. So I have a lot of questions about ultralight in general. I always like to say the niches or the riches are in the niches, and you've nailed the ultralight niche, and I think it's awesome. The focus of this podcast is definitely to help those founders, like the people you're talking about, the people, your vendors, like what can we do to help them? And so I want to kind of turn the conversation towards that. Do you get to deal with, I'm sure you're texting and calling and speaking with founders on a regular basis. So what do you think are the things that separate the good from the great founders? What are they doing operationally? What are they doing from marketing perspective? Like, how are they wrapping their minds around it? So if you were to sit down in a room of 20 of them and say, hey, yeah, these are the things that I think I've seen are working. What are those things?
It's a really good question. Yeah, being a founder requires it's a unique skill set. I think first and foremost, successful businesses have some vision of a plan. I think it is, and I'm kind of this person. I just kind of like to dive in and start going. And I think that's part of the reason why Big Outdoors wasn't particularly successful, is I didn't have a vision for where it was going to go. I didn't have a roadmap to be able to do it. I didn't really have a thought of what I was trying to get to and strategically how I was going to get there. So I think like before you just like dive in and start making something and starting a website, like starting to think about like, okay, what is my ideal version of what this could turn into? If I'm sitting here thinking in 5 years, like, oh my God, I can't believe that I got here. What is here? Like, what is that? And then trying to backwards plan from there. I think a lot of brands in a haste to feel like they're doing stuff for their brand, just make a million little moves that are super inconsequential, but it puts them in motion. And sometimes that can be good, but sometimes it just makes you feel like you're doing stuff that you're not doing. Like if you're posting Instagram posts to 5 people, you should figure about how to grow your Instagram base before you think about the creativity of your post. If you're starting an ambassador program, but you don't have a community that cares, start working on a community that cares before you start working on a small ambassador team that cares. I think of that as having a plan, and it doesn't have to be perfect and it's going to change 8 billion times, but having like a couple of big strategic moves. For me, it is always better to make a couple of big moves than it is to make a ton of small moves. And sometimes it feels like those big moves are unavailable to you, but you just have to like keep trying to put them into spaces. Like you can post to your Instagram or send newsletters to your 100 followers all day. But if you get that product into the hands of a big influencer and you spend a couple of hours doing that, that's going to have a way bigger impact than the hours and days and months of your life you are going to be making all of these tiny little small moves. And I've always kind of taken this approach to businesses. And I think businesses that understand this very core idea are successful, which is you don't have to build an audience on your own. You don't have to build something from scratch. You have to connect with like-minded communities that already exist that if they just knew about your stuff, would love it. You know, like with Garage Grown, we didn't invent ultralight backpacking. Have we been a part of its growth? Sure. But we didn't grow Garage Grown by like inventing what ultralight backpacking is. We did it by connecting with media spots, influencers, brands that were already in this space that we thought, oh man, if this person who's on, you know, the ultralight subreddit knew about Garage Grown, they'd be enthusiastic about it. How do we put Garage Grown in front of those people? Ooh, backpacking light. That's a community full of people that love ultralight backpacking. How do we make sure that they know about what Garage Grown gear is? And so just like positioning yourself into spaces where you don't have to build everything your own, but like you do need to make strategic partnerships in genuine ways. And so I think when brand founders understand that there like needs to be a plan, and part of that plan has to be like, what are some of these big connections and moves that you can make? I feel really solid that small brands understand the context and the kind of the game that they're playing in.
Nice. Perfect. You kind of touched on what I was going to ask you about next, is because I think Garage Grown Gear is a good example you're a good example to the other brands and to the brands that you sell currently and to the brands that want to be on Garage Grown Gear. Is like how you've done a lot of organic growth. I mean, I think you mentioned a second ago, you have an email list of 200,000 people. Congratulations. Right. That is very, very valuable. I always try to encourage people to focus on the email list, because that's an audience that you own, as opposed to Mark Zuckerberg owning and sharing and paying, making you pay for it. So what are the big things that have worked for you? You just kind of mentioned a few of the things, like finding those right communities and tagging into them. And, Reddit is huge for that. And, but what are the bigger, was it YouTube? Was it the email list? Like, how did you grow that list? What are the kind of the big heavy hitters for you?
Yeah, I think like marketing this should be new to no one. And I know it's not new to you, but like marketing is becoming more complicated in the sense that you can't just throw money at meta ads and be like, oh, it's going to work. Like that might've worked 10 years ago, but it's harder. And that's kind of is like just the play that a lot of people run. So if you want to differentiate yourself in marketing, you kind of have to take the time to be able to build relationships with influencers, tap into media outlets. I think for us, it's about diversification and kind of constantly be willing to try it, change it, try it again. I think on the marketing side of it, like we have definitely our email list is our bread and butter. As you said, it's not something that, Instagram's algorithms can change. TikTok can vanish the next day. Facebook can do whatever it wants to do. But one of the snail mail of 2024 of emails is something that has changed remarkably little over the entire time I've ran Garage Grown, and it has been the backbone of our business. Our email list is really solid, and if we want to mobilize anyone to do anything, it's happening on our newsletter. It's not happening through Instagram. It's happening through people clicking on links in newsletters, and that's what makes sales. And so maybe it's not the sexiest thing to be on, but if you are not a small brand that is growing your email list, you are missing out on huge potential.
How would you recommend people grow that email list?
Yeah, unfortunately, there are surprisingly few uncreative or creative ways to be able to do it. Ours have been pretty much entirely gathered through sales and through giveaways. Just having customer data and giveaways, I think they're less effective than they used to be. But when we first started running giveaways, we could get 30 to 40,000 email subscribers from a single giveaway. I mean, we still get 25 to 30,000 at this point, but usually only like 10 to 15 of those are new to our platform. Giveaways, people might say they're spammy. People might say that they are annoying. And yes, all of these things are true. And they are the single best way of growing your email subscriber base. There is no other way that comes even close to growing that as rapidly. You can pay for it, and it's going to cost you an extreme amount of money. I don't know how much a 200,000 person email list is worth, but it's a lot. And
and it's very cold.
It's very cold.
It's a cold email
and
list.
Don't buy lists. That won't work.
Don't buy lists. It's
don't
filthy.
do that.
So do you, in those giveaways, because that is a very good tactic. In those giveaways, are you partnering with your brands themselves to kind of expand the reach, or is it just all kind of organic and straight from the mouth of Garage?
Yeah. So this goes directly into I don't need to grow the audience myself. I need to tap into audiences that already exist that would love to know about Garage Grown if they knew about us. So, when we're throwing giveaways, we're requiring all of our partnering brands to send newsletters, to send social media posts. And we pick our kind of core audience. So like most giveaways you see us run, like they will include Z-Packs, they will include Hyperlight, kind of our core audience. But then they'll typically include a couple of brands that are not exactly in our niche. So brands like Giver Gloves or like Koala-Tree, brands that are adjacent but have audiences that might not be as familiar, but are probably bringing in some curious. They might be
ultralight curious.
Ultralight curious, that's right. Yeah, they've heard about it. Maybe they've heard of Garage Grown. But in that way, we're bringing in new audiences through kind of giveaways. But we're not just like partnering with just some big brand and just doing it that way. It's like a part of that ecosystem. And that to me is a really great way of doing it. And having similar expectations, like, our big brands that are participating get, a sizable chunk of emails from it. Our smaller brands get slightly less. And even some of our smallest brands, we can't spread emails across 30 brands that are participating. But we try to have it so that it is worth it for brands to participate at whatever size that they are. A tiny brand that has an Instagram following of 100 people, we can't share a 30,000 person email list from it. And I don't even think they want the MailChimp fees to be able to, handle a 30,000 person email list. But yeah, giveaways, there's a lot of different places that run them. But that is a great way of cross-pollinating audiences to put yourself in conversation and community with other players and other brands that you want to be associated with. And I think it's pretty cool that we can have a startup brand that can suddenly be in the same email as Nemo or as Darn Tough Socks. And suddenly Darn Tough Socks is sending out an email that has a logo of a brand that just started 2 weeks ago. And that's a cool thing. So we love throwing those because it's great for our small brands. And I think all of our brands pretty much would love to be in all of our giveaways if they could be, but we've got too many brands to kind of consistently have that. But yeah, find, and honestly,
Cool.
just like go on Instagram and see who's hosting these giveaways and shoot them emails and say, hey, can I get in on this next giveaway? There's some pay to play places out there that'll charge you $500, $1,000 to be a part of these giveaways. If that's all you can get access to, it's not terrible. It's probably worth it if you're going to get, 7, 8, 10,000 email subscribers from it. But largely there's a lot of places that do it because they also benefit from it. Like we benefit massively from doing giveaways. So it'd be stupid for us not to host them. We don't need to charge brands. That's not the model. So
Yeah, going back to your strategy, the comment you made about having a long-term strategy plan. If you are getting that list, you are going to participate in a giveaway and you're going to get a list of 5,000, 7,000, 8,000. Have a plan what you're going to do with that. There's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. And there's a lot of missed opportunity if you don't have a good strategy around what that looks like to nurture that list and grow that list over time and kind of give them what they want.
Totally.
So it's not just about getting the names on the list. It's about what are you going to do with it afterwards. If you build it, they don't necessarily come. So, and I think it kind of comes full circle in that it makes sense that you use that you use giveaways and contests because that's how you found Amy.
That's right.
So, I mean, it makes sense. Like that's kind of the foundation that Garage Grown Gear has been built upon. So that's cool. Just wrapping up here, I have 2 last questions for you. Something that you and I have messaged back and forth with about is kind of digital minimalism and just we are both balancing running businesses, trying to be active in our communities and also raising young families at the same time. So I'm really curious. I know you have a lot of good opinions and kind of good work hygiene around how you manage your time, how you manage all the inbound. So tell me a little bit about what it is that you do and what maybe the current state, because everything's evolving and changing. We're always finding new things. What's your current state of, let's just call productivity is a bad word, but whatever, we'll call it productivity.
Yeah, that to me, it is definitely a constant evolution. It is kind of trying to figure out what works for the current iteration of myself. But I think, as a small business owner, you just have nonstop input and you have opinions and ideas coming from you at all different directions. And a lot of times I feel like it's just like it's like non-consensual. Like I didn't ask for that. I didn't want it, but it's just constantly finding ways to kind of infiltrate your brain. And I think one of the things that can make a really good business owner is the ability to kind of handle a lot. And I think I can handle a lot as a person, but I don't think it's good for me. Just because I have the skill doesn't mean that it long-term is what is positive for me. And so I am someone that I'm an everything or nothing kind of person. So I'm a vegetarian. I largely became a vegetarian, 18 years ago because I was like, I need to stop eating like crappy fast food meat. So my solution was like to not eat fast food. It was to like not eat meat at all. And so I haven't. And similarly, like I know if I have access to my phone, if I had an iPhone, I would use it all the time. And I would check Shopify and emails, like a tick. I would check it every time I stood up, every time I got out of the car, every time I went to the bathroom, every time I did anything, I would be just plugged into this thing that sometimes was really gratifying and at other times just stressed me out by changing my brain space, by taking me from where I was to some other totally different space. And I'd feel, just like hijacked. So, I moved to a dumb phone, a light phone about 2 years ago, and it just doesn't have emails and it doesn't have sales or anything or any type of web interface. And if someone calls me from a number that I don't know, they don't leave a message, I just block it. And, I essentially like just try to, when I'm working, I'm all in. My brain is so on and my brain's on work most of the time anyway, but I don't need devices reminding me that I need to be thinking about work. And in fact, I feel like when I unplug from my email a bit, I use this app called Freedom, which just limits your browsing at certain times. And I, because of you, added my little inbox. I don't remember the exact name of it, but it only lets me check my inbox 3 times a day, which I love.
Inbox when ready.
That's the one. Yeah, it really, and it's I haven't found a way to easily get around it. And if you know how to get around it, don't tell me because it's currently doing a great job of locking me out. But it just, it allows me to be fully present where I'm at. And I think it really allows space for me to sit with ideas. I think the only way to really determine if the billions of ideas that I have every day are good or not is to let them sit. And I can't sit with them if I'm constantly looking at new emails or checking text messages or looking at what's happening within. I think I just really needed to kind of hone down the information that was coming at me. I think to some extent that's a privilege of now running a slightly larger business, is that I don't have to be plugged into the nuance of absolutely everything. I mean, largely, I'm not particularly involved in the day-to-day running of Garage Grown. I have a very specific role that I think adds a lot of value to Garage Grown, but it doesn't find myself on the packing table or answering customer service questions or a lot of those things. But I think like when one does have the opportunity to create healthy boundaries, it's almost one's responsibility to take it. Because if I don't have those healthy boundaries, I'm not going to set that as a standard for my staff. I'm going to bring levels of anxiety and concern to my staff that's not needed. Like to some extent, like I need to be able to have a certain level of like mental fortitude and space to be able to be a CEO of a company. And to the extent that I've thought about ditching my laptop for a desktop, I'm sitting in my basement right now, and I really like I'm on my laptop too much, and I would like to be more present with my newborn. And not be thinking about, oh, well, my computer is just a couple feet away. Maybe I should just click refresh on Reddit or whatever, and just kind of eliminate some of the distractions that are there. So I think a lot of these things are like minimalism in life and minimalism in business are two of the same. Like you can do your best work when you're simplifying. I use the line "simplify to amplify" all the time. Of like you just need to hone in what you're doing so that you can do what you're doing better. And I think that's in parenthood, in being a good partner and being a good friend and being a good business owner and being a good boss. Like if you've got too much stimulus, you're not going to do anything well because you're going to be dysregulated yourself.
Appreciate that, man. I really appreciate that. So last question I ask everybody on this podcast is, how do you define success for yourself?
Great question. It's changed a lot. I view everything that happens with Garage Grown at this point kind of as gravy. I never thought that it would be at the spot where it is. I took a month off for parental leave, and I came back and there were 3 employees that I didn't hire and I didn't know. And that was really cool to be like, whoa, this thing can just kind of go on without me. And we've got a team of 20 to 25 folks at this time. And all of this was unfathomable to me in my basement, just like hanging out, chilling, trying to stay warm next to my like little space heater. But I think success to me looks like, it looks like continuing to do what Garage Grown Gear is doing. And it's honestly like kind of about the feels. If brands are finding a ton of value to what Garage Grown Gear is doing, and they feel like this is a valuable platform for them to be on, and customers still feel like, wow, there's this place online that I really love, and it feels like community, and it feels like a mom and pop place online, and our staff is like excited about doing Garage Grown, that's success to me. Like if customers, brands, and ourselves are like, this is cool, this is working. I don't care if that's 50% growth, 30% growth, flat, whatever. If the 3 main groups that are involved in it are all feeling like this is a positive thing, then I want to be a part of a positive community. And that would feel valuable to me at whatever size of a company we're at.
That's great. Really appreciate that. So where can people find you? Just plug Garage Grown Gear, tell them where they want to go and sign up for your newsletter. Give us the details so we can follow along.
GarageGrownGear.com. That's our website. We've got a newsletter that's kind of always talking about new and different stuff and highlighting small ultralight brands. I've become a faux LinkedIn poster as well. If you're interested in kind of connecting on business stuff, you can follow me on LinkedIn or connect with me and shoot me a message. But yeah, Instagram, wherever.
Cool. This has been awesome. You're a good man, Lloyd Vogel. I really appreciate
Christian, this was just incredibly fun, and thanks so much for having me on.
Thanks so much for listening all the way to the end of this podcast. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend you think may enjoy it too. Sharing goes a long way. You can also take a few seconds to subscribe to the podcast. Anything you do to help share the love here, we'd appreciate it. Thanks so much for following along, and we'll see you next time.